Hello and welcome to A Fistful of Dice. My name is Matt. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how I run Spelljammer. Coming up here in a few weeks, I'm going to be kicking off my very first Spelljammer campaign that I've ever run using the 5th edition D&D rules. I'm actually going to be running 2 Spelljammer games kind of concurrently, one with my main group and one with a group of new players that I've been introducing D&D 5th edition to. For those of you unaware, Spelljammer is medieval fantasy in space. If you've ever seen the movie Treasure Planet, it's kind of got the same feel, the same look to it, the same kind of technology. Essentially in Spelljammer, these massive sailing ships are outfitted for travel in wild space, and they're fueled by arcane magic and piloted by mages who connect to a device known as a helm and then control the ship and ensure that its atmosphere and artificial gravity are functioning. A lot of the ships have a very cool fantasy flavor to them, maybe looking like dragons or different kinds of animals. Spelljammer was created as a way for parties to travel to different campaign settings. So if you were in the Forgotten Realms, you could leave realm space using a Spelljammer ship and then, journey to gray space and land on, the world of Greyhawk and explore Greyhawk. Or you could take off from there and go over to Athos over in Dark Sun World and hang out over there for a while. Spelljammer is a really cool idea. It's a neat setting. It has a lot of fun sort of camp, like Flash Gordon-y style flavor to it. A lot of people don't care for Spelljammer. I happen to think it's radical and just totally awesome idea. I love the mishmash of fantasy and sci-fi together. I think it's done really well. However, there are some things about the setting and about the world of Spelljammer that I just find a little convoluted, and so I'm going to be running my game quite a bit differently than you would find in the campaign box of Spelljammer. So I'm just going to kind of talk about some of my ideas I have for Spelljammer. Maybe you'll be able to use them in your campaign. So the first thing I've just completely done away with is the idea of the crystal spheres. In Spelljammer, there's these different worlds I've talked about, like realm space and gray space, that separate the different campaign settings of D&D and also connect them with a way to travel between them. I've completely taken that out. I don't want the characters to be able to journey to different campaign settings, and in fact I'm not going to be using campaign settings at all. It really is going to be a space opera type game where you can go to different planets. There are elves on one planet, dwarves on another. There might be a floating city that has a huge population of elves and humans and halflings, what have you. It really is going to have more of like a Star Wars feel without the technology aspect to it. So crystal spheres, gone. I've also, I like the idea of the flow, which is essentially hyperspace in Spelljammer, but I'm replacing it with something that I've called the warp. And it's sort of influenced by the idea of the warp in Warhammer 40k, but it's not another dimension. The warp in my Spelljammer game is essentially a river of pure, volatile, unchecked, arcane energy. Essentially a stream of wild magic cutting through the center of the universe. And there's different streams and tributaries that come off from it. But Spelljammer ships are specifically designed to utilize the currents of the warp and travel at faster than light speed to reach certain distances. So this sets up a fun dynamic where the planets and the systems that are nearer to the warp that cuts through the center of this galaxy are going to be more wealthy and more well off. Much like a coastal city or a city on a river would have more trade coming through it, it's a pretty similar sort of idea. So the planets and the systems that are far away from the warp are going to be a little bit more in the dark as far as space travel goes and as far as people coming in and out of the planet goes. So that kind of sets up a fun dynamic. The other thing I'm changing is the whole concept of the helms and how they work. So in the Spelljammer box set, or the generic campaign setting, basically any wizard of high enough level, any mage, any arcane magic user of high enough level can sit at the helm of a Spelljammer and control it. I kind of went a darker route with it. I'm sort of channeling my inner Battlestar Galactica here, Outlaw Star, and I'm making it so that if you are a mage that decides to become a helmsman, you fuse with the spelljamming ship permanently. You sit down in this chair, they basically plug you in, and your body, mind, and soul are fused with the ship forever. If the ship lives, you live. You become the ship. Shows like Farscape have the pilot who's basically plugged into the ship. Outlaw Star, you have your android who controls the higher functions of the ship, essentially acting as the ship's AI. And in Battlestar Galactica, there's the hybrids who are a certain type of Cylon that control the base stars. So these wizards who become helmsmen, they do retain their personality for a time. They do become sort of like the ship's AI or computer. They can talk to anyone in the ship because they are the ship. They can control the ship. They control its motion, its speed. They maintain its atmosphere and gravitational fields. The crew is there to man the guns and basically like control like sails and things like that. So the helmsman he's the helmsman. He's the guy steering the ship. But the longer they are fused with a ship, the more of their personality kind of disappears with time. The spelljamming ships that have been around for a century or two, their helmsmen are like robots. They're truly like artificial intelligences. They have no real personality to speak of. They become almost robotic because the line between helmsman and ship blurs and continues to blur the more they're connected to the ship. Some people aspire to be helmsmen. In High Elven society, in my Spelljammer game, there are institutes, academies dedicated to training helmsmen. But in other cultures, such as the mountain dwarves, who pretty much abhor arcane magic, the idea of a living being becoming a conduit of arcane energy, basically becoming the battery of a ship, is really bad to them. They find it to be borderline evil, and they go out of their way to construct ships that can travel through space without using a helmsman. So my Spelljammer game is gonna be like a fun mixture between the fantasy of D&D, the space opera adventure of Star Wars, and sort of the frontier mentality of Firefly. There's the savage races living on the black outskirts of the system. You have orcs, beholders, Neogi, Thrykean, space dragons, all sorts of fun stuff like that. And nearer to the warp, you have the civilized races like elves and humans and things like that. In my game, the high elves are like the most into space. They have completely abandoned their terrestrial homeland and sought their future, in the wild energies of space. They believe that's where they need to be. Another thing I'm kind of doing differently is I wanted to include drow in my Spelljammer game, but I didn't want them to just be underground elves. So the drow in my Spelljammer game, they are elves, formerly high elves, that thousands of years ago went to the edges of space. And the energy of the warp kind of transformed them and mutated them. And so the drow in my Spelljammer game, they're not the white-haired, like obsidian-skinned elves of the Underdark. They are completely translucent skin, glowing eyes, white hair, and kind of insane from living out on the very edges of space. So I think that's going to be really fun to encounter the space drow that I've created for my Spelljammer campaign. The orcs in my Spelljammer campaign, they use catapults to launch themselves through space. And they have these special tattoos on them called spell brands, which their warlocks brand into them. And these tattoos are activated through rage. And most of the tattoos allow them to survive in the vacuum of space for a short amount of time, but other tattoos will allow them to cast cantrips. It will allow them to activate, the further primal energies of their rage, harden their skin, magic their weapons, things like that. So the orcs are going to be really fun to play with as sort of a raiding culture. Another thing I've come up with to kind of explain some things and also just make things a little bit easier for the players is the idea of a preserver. In generic Spelljammer, if you leave the atmosphere and the gravitational field of your Spelljammer ship, you automatically just have a magical bubble around yourself. I don't really like that idea. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So I came up with the idea of a preserver, which is essentially a little belt buckle that if you fall off of a Spelljammer ship or get thrown off of a Spelljammer ship and you're in the vacuum of space, you can thumb this thing on and it creates a field of breathable atmosphere around you for 1 day. So you can survive up to 1 day in the vacuum of space. This also allows you to, if you're like on an asteroid or a planet without atmosphere, you can turn on your preserver and it's essentially a magical spacesuit. It gives you a breathable atmosphere that you can use. So that sort of takes care of a lot of the issues in Spelljammer where it's like, well, what happens if I fall overboard? Or what happens if I want to catapult myself over to another ship? Or what happens if I get stranded on an asteroid? Things like that. So that kind of takes away some of the issues that arise from those ideas. So anyway, that's how I'm going to run my Spelljammer campaign. That's just some of the ideas that I'm putting into it to kind of make it my own. You should always, even if you're playing a pre-published campaign setting, you should always try to make it your own. Put your own flavor in there and make it how you want to run it. So I'm pretty excited to run Spelljammer here in a few weeks, and I'm definitely going to be doing some videos talking about how it's going. I've never really run a space-style game using D&D, so I'm hoping it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm definitely pretty jazzed to be DMing it. So anyway, guys, that's going to be it for me. Take care, and happy gaming all.